Hello, friends. We want to know from which cities you listen to us. Like and write in the comments where you are from, and also share what shocking stories happened in your city or even to you. Subscribe because the next story may be about your city or your personal drama. And now a new exciting story. Ethan Hayes stood by the large window of his Los Angeles mansion, looking out over the Pacific Ocean. The morning sun was just beginning to warm the horizon, and the air was filled with the faint smell of salt mixed with the coffee brewing in the kitchen. At 35, Ethan was in his prime as an NFL linebacker, his broad shoulders and calloused hands speaking of years of hard collisions and rigorous training. Today was the team's final day of preseason training, and he could already feel a slight tingle in his nerves. The house was quiet, save for the muted clatter of dishes in the kitchen as Liv, his wife, prepared breakfast. Their 10-year-old son, Jake, still in his teen Ethan pajamas, sat at the kitchen island, swinging his legs and leafing through a comic book. Liv, her blonde hair pulled back into a loose bun, looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes, but she smiled as she set a tray of warm rolls on the table. "Ethan, the coffee is ready," she called without turning around as she poured boiling water into the coffee pot. Ethan pulled away from the window and walked over to the kitchen island, patting Jake on the head. The boy looked up, grinned, and immediately went back to his comic. "Thanks, honey," Ethan said, taking the hot mug. He took a sip and winced. "Damn, this is strong. What, are you trying to get me going before my workout?" Liv turned around, wiping her hands on her apron, and rolled her eyes. "Don't whine, champion. You need to be on your feet all day. And anyway, you're always nervous before the season, so drink up and don't grumble." Ethan chuckled, but saw her smile falter as she turned back to the stove. Jake put down his comic and reached for a bun, smearing jam on his fingers. "Dad, are you going to play today?" he asked, licking his fingers. "Like at practice? Or are they going to make you just run again?" Ethan sat down opposite, taking another sip of coffee. "Not exactly playing, buddy. Today is a tactical workout so that everything is clear in the first game. But I will show a couple of techniques if the coach allows. Do you want me to tell you later?" "Yeah," Jake nodded, his eyes lighting up. "Are you going to make that shot of yours? You know, the one where you knock everyone down, like you did last year against the Raiders?" Liv snorted, placing a plate of omelet in front of Jake. "Jake, eat properly and don't wave your fork around. And don't goad your father, he's already on edge." "I'm fine, Liv," Ethan said, looking at her. "It's just, before a season, you're always a little on edge. I want everything to go smoothly." She nodded, but her gaze slid to the side as she began to fiddle with the dishes. Ethan saw her drop a spoon, and it clanked onto the counter. Liv frowned, quickly picking it up and throwing it in the sink. "Liv, are you okay?" he asked, lowering his voice so Jake wouldn't hear. "Yeah, I'm fine," she replied, not looking at him. "I was just thinking. I'm swamped at work, and I have to grade Jake's school project." Ethan frowned, but decided not to press. He turned to Jake, who was already stuffing a piece of bun into his mouth. "Hey, buddy, tell me about this project of yours. What's going on there? Are you making soda volcanoes again?" Jake swallowed the piece and spoke, waving his arms. "No, Dad, this is cooler. We're doing a presentation about space. I chose Mars because, you could live there if you built a base. I already found a bunch of photos from the rovers, and Miss Harris said I was great." "Seriously?" Ethan raised his eyebrows, smiling. "My son is already planning to go to Mars. What if you build a base? Will you take me?" "Only if you cook burgers," Jake chuckled, "because Mars is just rocks and dust." Liv laughed softly at the sink, but Ethan noticed that her lips were pressed together, as if holding something back. He leaned back in his chair, watching her. She had always been a rock, organizing their lives while he was away at practices and games. But she had seemed distant in recent weeks, and it bothered him. "Liv, come sit down and eat with us," he said, pushing a plate towards her. "You've been on your feet all day. Give yourself 5 minutes." "Just a moment, I'll just wash the dishes," she answered without turning around. Come on, the dishes can wait, Ethan insisted. Jake, tell Mom to sit down. Mom, sit down, Jake said, poking his fork into the air. Otherwise, Dad will start telling me about his old games again, and I'll go crazy. Ethan laughed, but Liv just shook her head, wiping her hands. You two are conspirators, she said, finally sitting down. She picked up a bun, but instead of eating it, she began to crumble it on her plate. So, Jake, did you bring your uniform for school? You have gym today, don't forget your sneakers. Yeah, it's all in the backpack, Jake replied, but then frowned. But I don't want to run in circles. Mr. Kelly always yells at me if I fall behind. Well, you're Hayes' son, Ethan winked. Show them how it's done, and if anything happens, tell Kelly I'll talk to him. No, Dad, Jake rolled his eyes. He'll just drive everyone crazy. Liv smiled, but her gaze wandered off again. Ethan decided to change the subject. Liv, are you in the office all day today? He asked. Maybe you could stop by the base after lunch. Coach said he'd finish early. We could pick up Jake together. She froze, then shook her head. It won't work, she said. I have a meeting with a client, then I have to hand in a report. I'll be late. Late again? Ethan frowned. You've been running like a marathon runner lately, non-stop. Maybe you should take a day off. Ethan, it's okay, she replied, a little more sharply than necessary. There's just a lot of work. Don't start. He raised his hands in surrender. Okay, I'm just worried about you, that's all. Jake, sensing the tension, poked his father in the shoulder. Dad, tell me about the game. You know, the one where you scored a touchdown. Mom, you saw it, right? Liv nodded, but her smile was forced. I saw it, Jake. Your dad was a star, as always. Ethan looked at her, trying to catch her eye, but she was already standing, clearing away the plates. He sighed and turned to Jake. Okay, buddy, about the touchdown? It was 3 years ago, against the Chargers. I was. Dad, I know that story, Jake interrupted, rolling his eyes. Tell me something new. Like, how did you argue with the coach? Ethan laughed. Oh, you want some gossip? Okay, it happened. Coach Robertson once decided that I should run more than the others. I said to him, Rob, I'm not a sprinter. I knock people over. And he. Ethan, Liv interrupted from the sink. Jake needs to get ready. And you too. You don't want to be late. Ethan glanced at his watch and cursed under his breath. She was right, time was running out. He finished his coffee and stood up. Okay, boss, he said, winking at Jake. Buddy, go get dressed. Mom's going to get us both. Jake chuckled and ran upstairs, leaving the comic book on the table. Ethan walked up to Liv, who was still standing at the sink, and put his hand on her shoulder. Liv, seriously, are you okay? He asked quietly. You seem I don't know, it's distant. She tensed, but turned to face him, forcing a smile. Ethan, I'm just tired. Work, Jake, home, it's all piled up. Don't worry about it. If something's wrong, tell me, he insisted. We're a team, right? Yes, she nodded, but her gaze was evasive. Go get ready, and don't forget to call after training. Tell me how it went. Ethan nodded, but the feeling of uneasiness remained. He kissed her forehead, but she pulled away slightly, as if she didn't want it. He pretended not to notice and went upstairs to change. Half an hour later, Ethan was ready, a duffel bag over his shoulder, a cap on his head. Jake, already in his school uniform, was waiting by the door, carrying a backpack. Liv stood nearby, holding the car keys. Dad, can you give me a lift? Jake asked. Not today, buddy, Ethan replied. I have an early practice. But Mom's gonna give you a ride, right, Liv? Sure, she said, but her voice was tired. Jake, come on, don't be late. Ethan hugged his son, ruffling his hair. Behave well, champion. And don't forget about Mars, I'm waiting for your presentation. Yeah, Dad. Jake grinned and ran to the car. Ethan turned to Liv, who was already opening the door. Good luck today, she said, but didn't look at him. Thanks, he replied. And Liv, if anything happens, call me, okay? Okay, she nodded and left without turning around. Ethan watched them climb into the car and felt a knot growing inside him. Something was wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on it. He shook his head, pushing the thoughts away, and headed for his truck. Today was a big day, and he couldn't afford to be distracted. Still, as he started the engine, the image of Liv avoiding his gaze wouldn't leave his mind. Ethan Hayes parked his truck at the team's practice facility outside Los Angeles. The morning smog still hung over the field, and the sun was barely breaking through the haze. He pulled his duffel bag from the back and headed toward the locker room, nodding at familiar physical therapists and assistant coaches. At 35, Ethan was a veteran of the team, but still one of the team's best midfielders. Today's practice their last before the season was supposed to hone their game to perfection. But Ethan's thoughts weren't just about football. His morning conversation with Liv, her evasive look and sharp tone, kept running through his head. The locker room was already buzzing with the usual bustle. Players were changing clothes, joking, someone was turning up the music loudly. The team's young newcomer, Kyle, was fiddling with his knee pads, glancing at Ethan. Hayes, are you with us today, or are you already on vacation in your thoughts? He called out, grinning. Ethan threw his bag on the bench and rolled his eyes. Kyle, go fix your laces before I tie them in a knot for you, he said, but he smiled. And don't talk nonsense, or Coach will make you run laps. Kyle laughed, but dutifully reached down to pick up his sneakers. Ethan pulled on his uniform, his muscles already aching from yesterday's workout. He loved this atmosphere, the noise, the sweat, the anticipation of the game. But today, something was off. He found himself checking his phone, hoping for a text from Liv. The screen was blank. Hey, Hammer, you in? Marcus, the team captain, called out, clapping him on the shoulder. We're practicing defense today, and I need your smart approach, not that grumpy mug. I'm in, Ethan muttered, shoving his phone into the locker. It's just been a weird morning. Marcus narrowed his eyes, but didn't push with questions. Okay, you'll figure it out. On the field, you have to be like a tank, got it. As always, Ethan nodded, forcing a smile. The team was already gathering on the field. Coach Robertson, gray-haired, and with a voice that could drown out the stadium, was shouting orders. Ethan walked out onto the grass, inhaling the smell of freshly mown grass. Robertson noticed him and waved. Hayes, come to us. We're working on blocking today. I don't want to get torn apart in the first game. Ethan nodded and fell into line. The training session began with a warm-up, running, jumping, push-ups. Sweat poured into his eyes, but Ethan concentrated on the rhythm, trying to put the morning conversation out of his mind. After the warm-up, they moved on to tactical drills. Ethan, as a midfielder, had to coordinate the defense, and Robertson kept him on his toes. Hayes, where's your head? The coach barked when Ethan missed Marcus's signal. If you sleep, we'll get smashed. Roger that, coach, Ethan shouted, gritting his teeth. He lunged at the dummy, knocking it over so hard it nearly flipped over. Now that's what I call it, Robertson approved. Once again, and without any mistakes. Ethan tried again, but his thoughts kept returning to Liv. Her "it's okay" sounded unconvincing, and he couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. Was it really the job that was getting to her? Or was it him? He spent too much time at the base, leaving her with Jake and the household chores. The break came 2 hours later. Ethan plopped down on the bench, breathing heavily, grabbing a bottle of water. Kyle sat down next to him, wiping sweat from his face. Listen, Hayes, you don't seem to be with us today, he said, lowering his voice. What's wrong? This is the third time the coach has told you off. Ethan took a sip of water and shrugged. Nothing, just family matters, he replied. Liv is kind of, I don't know, not in the mood. We almost had a fight this morning. Kyle whistled. Wow, Hammer, are you in a family drama? He smirked. But when he saw Ethan's look, he raised his hands. Okay, don't be mad. Maybe she's just tired. My sister gets like that when she's swamped at work. Maybe, Ethan muttered, but there was no conviction in his voice. She says it's work, but I don't know. Something doesn't add up. Well, just ask her straight out, Kyle advised. Women like to be listened to. My girlfriend, if I don't ask her what's wrong, she just explodes. Ethan chuckled, but thought about it. Maybe Kyle was right. He always tried to be a good husband, but with training and games, there was little time for conversation. He decided that tonight he would have a frank talk with Liv. Robertson walked over, arms crossed, his gaze boring into Ethan. Hayes, what's wrong? He asked, lowering his voice. You seem like you're on another planet today. If you don't get it together, I'm benching you for the first game. Ethan sat up straight, feeling the blood rush to his face. It's okay, coach. I'm just thinking about my family. Liv's been acting weird, and I can't figure out what's going on. Robertson frowned, but his tone softened. Family is the most important thing, son. Don't lose sight of them. But I need you here 100%. Sort things out at home and be with us on the field. Deal? Deal, Ethan nodded, feeling guilty. He respected Robertson. He was not just a coach, but almost a father to the team. Good. Now go practice your blocks with Marcus, and no thoughtful eyes, Robertson added, clapping him on the shoulder. Ethan returned to the field, trying to focus. The rest of practice went better. He found a rhythm, intercepted balls, coordinated defenses. But the conversation from that morning still swirled in his head. By the end of the day, he was exhausted, but anxious. He decided to call Liv on the way to the locker room, but she didn't answer. That only made him more anxious. In the locker room, Ethan quickly showered and changed. Marcus, throwing his bag over his shoulder, stopped next to him. Hey, Hayes, are you free tonight? The guys and I are going to a bar to celebrate the end of the training camp. You coming? Ethan shook his head. No, Marcus, I'm out today. I want to go home and sit with Liv and Jake. Well, whatever, Marcus shrugged. But if you change your mind, right, and, sort this out with Liv, we need you in shape, not with a sour expression. I'll try, Ethan replied, smiling. He walked out to his truck, glancing up at the sunset. It had been a half-hour drive home, and the whole time he was going over in his head how to start a conversation with Liv. The house was quiet when he walked into the mansion. Jake was probably asleep already. It was almost 8 o'clock. Liv was sitting on the living room couch, leafing through a book. She was wearing her favorite t-shirt and jeans, her hair down. She looked comfortable, but Ethan noticed that her fingers were nervously fiddling with the corner of the page. Hi, he said, throwing his bag at the door. Liv looked up and smiled, but it was weak. Hello? How is your day? Fine, he replied, sitting down in the chair opposite. The training was tough, but we made it. How are you? It's stressful, she said, closing her book, but not looking at him. Jake's school projects, work, everything at once. Ethan nodded, but decided not to remain silent. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Liv, can I talk? He asked. You've been I don't know, distant all day. Is something wrong? She sighed, putting the book down on the table. Ethan, I told you, I'm just tired. No need to make a big deal out of it. I'm not making a big deal out of it, he said, trying to keep his voice calm. I'm just worried. You barely look at me, and you almost lost your temper this morning. If something's wrong, tell me. Liv pressed her lips together, looking at her hands. It's all good, really. It's just a lot. Work, Jake, home. Sometimes I can't catch my breath. I can help, Ethan said. With Jake, with the chores, just tell me what you need. I'm coping, she replied, a little more sharply. You have enough as it is training games. No need to burden yourself with my problems as well. Ethan frowned, feeling irritation boiling inside him. Liv, we're a team. If you're having a hard time, I want to know. Don't brush it off. She finally looked at him, but there was something in her eyes that he couldn't quite place, either tiredness or irritation. Ethan, I appreciate that you're concerned, she said, softening her tone. but I just need some time to process this. Not now, okay? I'm tired. He wanted to object, but changed his mind. Maybe she was right, and he was pushing too hard. He nodded, leaning back in his chair. Okay? But if anything happens, I'm here, okay? Okay, she said, taking the book back. Have you eaten? There's some lasagna left in the fridge. Later, he said, standing up. I'll go check on Jake. Ethan walked upstairs, feeling a tightness in his chest. His son's room was dark, save for the nightlight next to the bed. Jake was asleep, hugging his pillow, his comic book on the floor. Ethan smiled, adjusted the blanket, and quietly left. When he returned to the living room, he saw that Liv had already gone into the bedroom. The book was on the table, open to the same page. He sat on the couch, staring at the blank screen of his phone. The anxiety was growing, but he didn't know what to do with it. Maybe tomorrow will be easier. He hoped that Liv was just burned out and needed time. But somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered that it wasn't that simple. Ethan woke before the alarm, but lay there, staring at the bedroom ceiling. Liv was still asleep next to him, her blonde hair spread across the pillow. He turned toward her, hoping for the familiar warmth of a morning embrace, but she had turned away in her sleep, pulling the covers up. Ethan sighed and stood quietly, trying not to wake her. The conversation in the living room yesterday had left a bad taste in his mouth, her evasiveness, her sharp, meddling tone. He went down to the kitchen, made coffee, and tried to focus on the upcoming workout. But his thoughts still swirled around Liv. When he returned upstairs with his mug, Liv was already in the bathroom. The door was closed, the shower was running. Ethan knocked. Liv, I made some coffee. Do you want me to bring it? He asked, trying to sound casual. No need, I'll be right down, she replied, her voice muffled but sharp. Ethan frowned but moved away. He glanced at Jake, who was still asleep, hugging his soccer ball. Smiling, Ethan adjusted the blanket and went back into the bedroom. Liv came out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, and immediately grabbed her phone from the nightstand. Ethan watched as she quickly scrolled through her messages, her fingers froze, and then she shoved the phone into her robe pocket, as if caught in the act. Who's there? He asked, trying not to sound suspicious. Liv flinched, but then smiled, too quickly. Nobody, just work correspondence, she said, not looking at him. The client has been pestering me since this morning. Ethan nodded, but his insides sank. She'd never hidden her phone before. He wanted to ask more, but Jake ran into the room, still in his pajamas, his hair disheveled. Dad, are you going to practice today? He asked, jumping on the bed. Can I come with you? Ethan laughed, picking up his son and sitting him on his lap. Not today, buddy. We have a closed training session, just for the team. But I'll tell you how it went tonight, okay? Okay, Jake sighed, but then perked up. Are you going to do that move of yours? The one where you knock everyone down? We'll see, Ethan winked. If Coach Robertson doesn't make us run laps. Liv stood at the mirror, brushing her hair. She said nothing, but Ethan noticed her hand trembling slightly as she picked up the hair dryer. He decided not to press her not in front of Jake. Mom, are you going to the office today? Jake asked, sliding out of bed. Yes, honey, Liv replied, turning on the hair dryer. But I'll take you to school. Go get dressed, don't be late. Jake ran away and Ethan walked up to Liv, putting his hand on her shoulder. Liv, if something's wrong, tell me, he said quietly. I can tell you're not yourself. She turned off the hair dryer and looked at him through the mirror. Her eyes were tired, but there was a flicker of irritation in them. Ethan, stop. I'm just busy. Don't make things up. He stepped back, raising his hands. Okay, whatever you say. Just, I'm here if anything. She nodded and turned the hair dryer back on, blocking out the noise. Ethan left the room, feeling uneasy inside. He went downstairs, packed his gym bag, and drove back to the base, but the image of Liv hiding her phone wouldn't go away. The training ground greeted him with the usual noise. Players warming up, coaches shouting, a lawnmower humming somewhere. Ethan dropped his bag in the locker room and changed, trying to concentrate. But thoughts of Liv were like a pesky noise. He walked out onto the field, where the team was already gathering for the morning briefing. Coach Robertson, clipboard in hand, was barking out instructions. "Hayes, where are you?" he barked, noticing Ethan staring into space. "We're practicing interceptions today. I need your focus." "I'm here, coach," Ethan replied, shaking himself. "Ready." "I hope so," Robertson muttered. "I don't want us to be torn apart because of your absent-mindedness." Ethan nodded and fell into line. The workout started with running, then moved on to paired drills. Ethan worked with Marcus, the team captain, on blocking. Marcus was on fire as always, egging everyone on. "Hey, Hammer, why are you so sour?" he shouted, dodging Ethan's grab. "Did Liv get you any coffee?" Ethan gritted his teeth and lunged forward, knocking Marcus to the mat. "Shut up, Marcus," he said, but he smiled. "Better watch your feet, or you'll fall over again." Marcus laughed as he stood up. "Now that's what I call it. Go on, don't relax." But Ethan felt out of shape. He missed a couple of signals, and Robertson yelled at him again. At halftime, Ethan sat on the bench, wiping away sweat. Kyle, the new guy, plopped down next to him, munching on an energy bar. "Hayes, you don't look like you've had much sleep today," he said. "Did Liv give you the runaround again?" Ethan shook his head as he looked out at the field. "No, I don't know. She's acting weird. She was hiding her phone this morning, like I caught her doing something." Kyle whistled. "Wow, sounds like a detective. Maybe she's just chatting with a friend. My sister does that when she doesn't want her boyfriend to see her chats." "Maybe," Ethan said, but he didn't believe it. "I called her during my break, but she didn't answer. She usually always picks up." "Well, ask her tonight," Kyle shrugged. "Just not as an investigator, or she'll go crazy." Ethan chuckled, but thought about it. He didn't want to be paranoid, but Liv had never acted like this before. He decided he would talk to her that evening, but carefully. Robertson called the team back, and the training continued. Ethan tried to give it his all, but thoughts of Liv distracted him. By the end of the day, he was exhausted, not from the workload, but from the tension inside. In the locker room, he checked his phone again, no messages, no missed messages. He called Liv, but got voicemail. It was too much. "Hayes, are you coming?" Marcus called, throwing his bag over his shoulder. "The guys and I are going to the cafe for a bite to eat. Let's go." "Nah, I'm going home," Ethan replied, standing up. "I need to talk to Liv." "Well, good luck," Marcus said, clapping him on the back. "Call me if anything happens. Don't be sad." Ethan nodded and walked out to the truck. The drive home seemed longer than usual. He turned on the radio, but the music was just annoying, so he turned it off. It was dark when he entered the mansion. Jake was asleep, judging by the silence. He found Liv in the bedroom, sitting cross-legged on the bed, texting on her phone. When she saw Ethan, she quickly locked the screen and put the phone away. "Hello," she said, but her voice was tense. "You're late." "Yes, the training session dragged on," he replied, throwing his bag into the corner. "And what are you doing?" "Nothing, just checking my email," she said, standing up. "Work-related issues." Ethan looked at her, feeling his insides boil. She was lying again. He could see her fingers fiddling nervously with the hem of her shirt. "Who was that?" he asked, nodding at the phone. "You've been sitting in it all evening." Liv frowned, crossing her arms. "Colleague Ethan, I told you work matters. What are you starting?" "I'm not starting," he said, trying to control himself. "It's just that you've been kind of closed off all day. You hide your phone, you don't answer calls. What's going on?" "Nothing's happening," she snapped, raising her voice. "Jesus, Ethan, are you serious? I'm just busy, and you're already thinking up a spy novel." "Liv, I'm not an idiot," he said, taking a step toward her. "You've never acted like this before. If something's wrong, just tell me. I'm your fucking husband." She turned away, looking out the window. Her shoulders tensed, and for a second Ethan thought she was going to cry. But she just shook her head. "Ethan, I'm tired," she said, more quietly. "I'm swamped with work, Jake and his projects and clients. I don't have time to deal with your suspicions." "These are not suspicions," he objected. "I'm worried about you, about us." Liv turned, her eyes cold. "If you were that worried, you wouldn't be hanging around the base all day," she said. "I'm managing, Ethan. Leave me alone." He froze, her words like a slap in the face. He wanted to answer, but decided against it. Not now, not when she was in this mood. He nodded and walked out of the bedroom, closing the door. In the living room, he sat on the couch, staring at the dark TV screen. The anxiety turned to certainty something was wrong. Ethan Hayes walked off the practice field, wiping sweat from his face. The sun was blazing, but Coach Robertson was in a rare good mood and had decided to end the camp early to give the team a breather before the final day. Ethan nodded goodbye to Marcus, the captain, and headed toward the locker room, his muscles aching from 2 hours of blocking and interceptions. "Hayes, why are you so gloomy?" Marcus shouted, throwing his bag over his shoulder. "Did Liv put you on a diet again?" "Fuck you," Ethan muttered, but the corners of his lips twitched. "I just want to go home." "Come on, don't be so sour," Marcus said, clapping him on the back. "If you change your mind, we'll be at the bar tonight." Ethan shook his head and walked into the locker room. He changed quickly, throwing his uniform in the locker. Thoughts of Liv kept coming back. Her evasive answers, her nervous glances at her phone, her sharp tone last night, it all added up to a disturbing picture. He decided to go home and talk. Stop wondering what was wrong with her. He pulled out his phone to text her, but decided against it. Face-to-face was better. The drive to the mansion took 20 minutes. Ethan parked outside the house, noticing that the living room window was open. Voices were coming from inside Liv and someone else. He frowned, wondering if it was a coworker or a friend. He entered quietly, dropping his duffel bag by the door, and walked toward the living room. Liv was sitting on the couch, and next to him was a young man Ethan didn't know. He was skinny, with dark hair, wearing jeans and a gray t-shirt, and he was talking, and Liv was laughing, her hand on his knee. They were so close that they didn't notice Ethan in the doorway. He froze, feeling the blood pounding in his temples. Anger flared, but he clenched his fists and forced himself to speak calmly. "You both have half an hour to get out of my house," he said, keeping his voice low. "I'm going to pick up Jake at school. You won't be here when I get back." Liv jumped up, her face pale, her eyes wide with horror. "Ethan," she breathed, her voice shaking. You're early. Please, it's not what it seems." The man Liv muttered. Christian stood up too, looking at the floor, his cheeks flushed. Ethan wasn't looking at him, his gaze fixed on Liv. He repeated it, word for word, to get the point across. "Half an hour. Pack your things," he said, his voice cold as steel. Liv stepped towards him, her hands shaking, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Ethan, wait until I explain," she said, her voice breaking. "I was alone, you were always training. We were just talking." "I don't care," he interrupted, looking her in the eyes. "Go away, both of you." Christian coughed as he stepped forward, his voice awkward. "Mr. Hayes, I didn't mean anything bad," he began. Liv was upset, and Ethan turned to him, his gaze silencing Christian. "Don't start," he said. "Just get out." Christian nodded, grabbing his jacket from the chair and heading for the door. Liv grabbed Ethan's hand, her fingers digging into his wrist. "Ethan, please don't do this," she said, her voice full of panic. "Think about Jake. Let's talk. I swear this was a mistake." Ethan pulled his hand away without looking at her. "This conversation is over," he said. "If you're still here when I get back, I'll call the police." He turned and walked out, anger choking him. In the car, he gripped the steering wheel, forcing himself to breathe evenly. He didn't want to think about Liv, about her tears, about what he'd just seen. Right now, Jake was the most important thing. He had to protect his son from this nightmare. He started the engine, but instead of heading to school, he drove in circles around the block, giving Liv and Christian time to get away. He didn't want to go back and see them again. 20 minutes later, he parked at the house and walked inside. The living room was empty. Liv's bag was gone. Her coat was not hanging by the door. There was a note on the kitchen table. "Ethan, I'm sorry. I'll call." He crumpled the paper and threw it in the trash. When he was sure they were gone, he got back in the truck and drove to school, trying to get himself together. Jake couldn't suspect anything. The school was 15 minutes away. Ethan parked at the playground where Jake was playing basketball with his classmates. When he saw his father, the boy smiled and ran up, dragging his backpack. "Dad, why are you here so early?" he asked, out of breath. "Is practice over?" "Yeah, coach gave me the day off," Ethan said, trying to sound calm. He patted Jake on the head. "Let's go home, buddy." Jake climbed into the car, throwing his backpack into the back seat. "Is Mom home?" he asked, buckling up. "She promised to make pizza." Ethan gripped the steering wheel, choosing his words. "I don't know, mate," he said. "Maybe she was late to work. We'll check." Jake nodded and started talking about school, how his team had won a basketball game, how his teacher had praised his Mars project. Ethan nodded, but his mind was on how to tell his son the truth. He didn't want to lie, but he couldn't hurt Jake either. He needed time to think things through. When they got back to the mansion, Ethan walked in first, making sure Liv was gone. The house was empty, only the scent of her perfume still lingered in the living room. Jake dropped his backpack by the door and ran to the refrigerator. "Dad, I'm hungry," he shouted. "Can I order pizza?" "Sure," Ethan said, pulling out his phone. He sat down on the couch, looking at Jake, who was rummaging through the fridge. "Jake, come here for a second." The boy turned around holding a bottle of juice. "What?" he asked, frowning. Ethan patted the couch next to him. "Sit down, buddy. We need to talk." Jake sat up, looking at his father with concern. "Dad, what happened?" he asked. "You're acting weird." Ethan took a deep breath, trying to keep his voice level. "Mom's gone, Jake," he said. "She needs time. She'll call, but for now it's just you and me." Jake frowned, his eyes shining. "She left? Where to?" he asked, his voice shaking. "She won't come back?" Ethan put his hand on his shoulder, trying to be firm. "Yeah, buddy," he said, "but I'm with you. We'll get through this, right?" Jake turned away, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. "She promised pizza," he muttered. "Why did she leave?" Ethan swallowed, feeling his heart tighten. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes," he said, "but it's not your fault. Mommy loves you, and I love you. We're a team, okay?" Jake nodded, but didn't look at him. Ethan wrapped his arms around him, holding him close. The boy wasn't crying, but his shoulders were shaking. Ethan held him, fighting his own pain. He didn't know how to explain to his son that their family was broken, but he knew he had to be strong. "Let's order that pizza," he said, pulling away. "With pepperoni, just like you like it." Jake sniffled and nodded. "With pepperoni," he said quietly. Ethan stood up, dialing the pizza place. He looked at his son, who was sitting there, staring at the floor, and knew that life would never be the same. Tomorrow he would call a lawyer, a prenuptial agreement would protect his rights, but right now, the main thing was Jake. He had to be a father, even if everything inside him was torn apart. Ethan woke up on the living room couch, his neck stiff and his head pounding. It had been a day since he'd kicked Liv and Christian out of the house. Yesterday, after he'd picked Jake up from school and explained that his mom was away, the boy had withdrawn and barely spoken. Ethan had tried to distract him with pizza and cartoons, but Jake had gone to bed early, leaving his father in the quiet of the sprawling mansion. In the morning, when Ethan went down to the kitchen, he found a note on the table. "Ethan, I'm sorry. I need time. I'm sorry." Liv's handwriting was neat but shaky. He crumpled the paper and threw it in the trash, feeling his anger return. He made coffee but didn't drink it, just stared out the window. Liv had destroyed their family, and now he needed to protect Jake and himself. He pulled out his phone and dialed the lawyer he'd worked with when he and Liv had signed their prenup 10 years ago. "Bob, this is Ethan Hayes," he said when the lawyer answered. "I want a divorce, and fast." "Ethan, what's wrong?" Bob asked, his voice sleepy but worried. "You and Liv, seriously." "Seriously," Ethan said, trying to sound calm. "She cheated. The contract is clear, right? I want it to be true, and I want Jake to stay with me." Bob paused, then coughed. "The contract is ironclad. If there is evidence of infidelity, she loses the rights to the house and most of the property. But custody of the child is a different matter. Courts usually look at stability for the child. Are you ready for this?" "I'm ready," Ethan said. "I'm his father. She doesn't deserve him." "Okay, come today," Bob said. "We'll get the paperwork together and submit it. But Ethan, it won't be quick, and it won't be easy." Ethan agreed and hung up. He went up to Jake, who was sitting in his room, leafing through a comic book, but not reading. The boy looked at his father, his eyes red. "Dad, did Mom call?" he asked quietly. Ethan sat on the bed next to his son. "No, buddy," he replied. "But she'll call. Are you okay?" Jake shrugged, looking at the floor. "I don't know. She just left, without me." Ethan swallowed, choosing his words. "Mom made a mistake, Jake," he said. "But it's not your fault. We'll deal with her, and you'll always be with us. Okay?" Jake nodded but didn't smile. Ethan patted him on the head. "Let's go. I'll make you some toast. With jam, just the way you like it." "I don't want to," Jake muttered, but he stood up and trudged after his father. In the kitchen, Ethan fiddled with the toaster, trying to fill the silence. "What's interesting at school today?" he asked, placing a plate in front of Jake. "It's okay," the boy replied, picking at his toast. "Can I not go today?" Ethan frowned, but he could tell his son was not in the mood. "Okay, you can skip one day," he said. "But you're going tomorrow, okay?" Jake nodded, chewing on his toast. Ethan looked at him, feeling guilty. He should have protected his son from this, but now he could only be there. After breakfast, he left for his lawyer's office, leaving Jake with a neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, who agreed to babysit. In Bob's office, Ethan signed the divorce papers, citing infidelity as the reason. The prenuptial agreement was clear. If Liv was unfaithful, she would lose her rights to the mansion, their joint savings, and most of their property. Ethan didn't want revenge, but he wasn't about to leave her with what they had built together. "What about Jake?" he asked, looking at Bob. "I want him to live with me." Bob leaned back in his chair, adjusting his glasses. "It's more complicated," he said. "California courts look at who had primary custody. Liv would probably say you were busy with your career and she was busy with Jake. If she has a good lawyer, she might win." "This is crazy," Ethan said, clutching his pen. "I'm his father. I made money so they could have everything. She cheated on me, and I have to lose my son." "I understand," Bob said. "We'll fight, but be prepared for the judge to award custody to her. You'll get visitation rights, but—" "Meetings," Ethan interrupted. "He's my son, not a guest." Bob raised his hands in a calming gesture. "We'll do everything we can, but the courts like stability for a child. Liv is probably already preparing her version." Ethan nodded, but inside he was seething. He signed the last papers and drove away, feeling hope slipping away. A week later, the trial began. Ethan sat in the courtroom, wearing a suit he only wore to weddings and funerals. Liv was on the other side in a formal dress, with a lawyer who looked like he was worth more than his truck. She didn't look at Ethan, her eyes were downcast. Jake stayed with Liv's grandmother so he wouldn't have to see it. Liv's lawyer argued that she was the primary caregiver, driving Jake to school, helping with homework, taking him to practice. Ethan, they said, was too busy with his NFL career to spend time with his son. Ethan argued through his lawyer, arguing that he provided for the family and was there when he could. But the judge, an older woman with tired eyes, ruled. Jake would live with Liv, and Ethan would be allowed to see her on weekends and half of the holidays. Ethan walked out of the room feeling like the ground was slipping out from under his feet. He sat down in Bob's office, clenching his fists. "It's not fair," he said, looking at the wall. "She destroyed everything, and I'm losing my son." "The court is looking at stability," Bob said with a shrug. "Liv has convinced them that she is the most important person in Jake's life. We can appeal, but the chances are slim." Ethan shook his head. "I don't want to drag Jake through the courts," he said. "He's in shock as it is." "Then focus on your time with him," Bob said, "and on yourself. You're still young, Ethan. You'll start over." Ethan nodded, but the lawyer's words rang hollow. He walked back into the mansion, which now felt foreign. Liv had packed up her things, leaving behind only boxes of Jake's clothes and a few toys. Ethan sat on the couch, looking at the empty wall where the family photo had once hung. He had taken it down yesterday, unable to bear to look at them smiling him, Liv, Jake on the beach. The photo was now in a drawer, along with the wedding ring. On Saturday, he drove to Liv's new home, a small apartment half an hour away. She answered the door, her face pale, her eyes puffy. "Ethan," she said quietly, "Jake's ready. He's in the room." "I didn't come to talk to you," he answered, without looking at her. "Where is he?" Liv nodded and called her son. Jake ran out and hugged his father, but looked confused. "Dad, are you staying long?" he asked, holding the backpack. "All day, buddy," Ethan said, smiling. "Let's go have some fun." In the car, Jake sat down, looking out the window. "Dad, why does Mom live here now?" he asked. "Is it because of me?" Ethan gripped the steering wheel, feeling his heart squeeze. "No, buddy," he said. "It's not about you. Mom and I can't live together anymore, but we both love you. You'll always be with us, just in different ways." "Aren't you leaving?" Jake asked, turning to him. "Never," Ethan said, squeezing his shoulder. "You're my son, and I'll always be here for you." Jake nodded, but didn't smile. They drove to the park, where they played football. Jake ran, laughing, but Ethan saw him stop occasionally, looking away, as if waiting for Liv. After the park, they stopped at a cafe, ordered burgers. "Dad, when will I see Mom again?" Jake asked, chewing a potato. "Tomorrow," Ethan replied. "She'll be waiting for you tonight, and next weekend you'll be with me again." "Why isn't it always with you?" Jake asked, looking at his plate. Ethan swallowed, choosing his words. "That's the court's decision, buddy," he said. "They think you're better off with your mom, but I'll take you as long as I can. We're a team, right?" Jake nodded, but said nothing. Ethan looked at him, guilt turning to anger at Liv, at the court, at himself. He should have been better, more considerate. Maybe none of this would have happened. That evening, he took Jake to Liv's. She stood at the door, looking at her son. "Thank you, Ethan," she said quietly. "Did he have a good day?" "Yeah," he replied without looking at her. "Take care of him." "Of course," she said, but her voice wavered. Ethan left feeling empty. Back at the mansion, he lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling. The silence was oppressive, and he closed his eyes, trying not to think about what he had lost. Tomorrow, he would start packing the mansion needed to be sold to start over. But for now, all he could do was lie there, struggling with the pain that wouldn't go away. Ethan Hayes stood on the practice field, breathing hard. Sweat was pouring down his face, and his knee was hurting more than usual. It had been a month since his divorce from Liv, and every day was a treadmill. Practice, the occasional call to Jake, the empty mansion. He tried to keep it together, but inside he was smoldering. Today the team was working on blocks, and Coach Robertson was yelling at him, as always, for more strength. "Hayes, come on, move it," he shouted, waving the tablet. "You're not on a walk." Ethan nodded, gritting his teeth, and lunged at the dummy, knocking it off its feet. But his knee popped as he landed, and a sharp pain shot up his leg. He collapsed on the grass, clutching his joint, and cursed. "Damn, what was that?" Marcus, The team captain ran up, helping him up. Knee, Ethan muttered, leaning on it. Again. Robertson approached, frowning. Hayes, get to the doctor right now, he said. Don't be a hero. Ethan wanted to protest, but the pain was so great that he only nodded. Marcus led him to the locker room, where the team physiotherapist was waiting. Sit down and let's see, said the physio, a guy in his 30s named Dan. He felt his knee, and Ethan winced. This is bad. We need to see an orthoptist and fast. Ethan gritted his teeth, feeling a coldness inside him. It's just a sprain, right? He asked, even though he knew the answer. Dan shook his head. Doesn't look like it. Go to the doctor, Ethan. Don't delay. The next day, Ethan sat in the orthoptist's office, looking at an MRI. Dr. Clark, an older man with a gray mustache, pointed at the screen. The meniscus is torn, the ligaments are damaged, he said, shaking his head. You are already playing at the limit. If you continue, you'll be limping in a year. It's time to retire. Ethan looked at the picture, but the doctor's words were hard to understand. So, that's it? He asked, his voice hoarse. No chance? The surgery will help, but playing at your level won't, Clark said. You can walk, run, and live a normal life, but the NFL is the end. Ethan nodded, but inside he was crumbling. Football had been his life for 15 years. Without it, he didn't know who he was. He signed his resignation from the NFL a week later in the team manager's office. Robertson was there, his face grim. You were the best, Hayes, he said, shaking his hand. Call me if anything happens. We'll find you a job coach, analyst, whatever. Thanks, coach, Ethan replied, but his voice was empty. I'll think about it. Marcus came in after and clapped him on the shoulder. Mola, what's wrong? He said, trying to smile. It's not the end of the world. Come to the bar. Let's get drunk like old times. Ethan shook his head. Not today, Marcus, he said. We have to deal with Jake. Well, look, said Marcus. If you go sour, I'll pull you out myself. Ethan forced a smile, but inside he was empty. Without a career, without Liv, with Jake only on weekends, he had lost everything that kept him afloat. The mansion had to be sold. Without his playing salary, he couldn't pay the bills. He packed up his belongings in 2 days, leaving behind only an old Ford Mustang, a box of Jake's photos, and a few medals. The rest went to auction. He moved to Austin, Texas, into a modest house on the outskirts of town. The wood floors creaked and the windows looked out onto an empty field of grass. The house was small, a kitchen, a living room, 2 bedrooms, but it was big enough for Ethan and his stuff. He hung a photo of Jake on the refrigerator, a boy in a football uniform, smiling for the camera. It was the only thing that made the house feel even remotely alive. But it still felt foreign. Ethan avoided his neighbors, rarely went out. The days dragged on the same way. He would run along the empty road in the morning, then watch old NFL games, trying to remember what it was like to be on the field. But each time he turned off the TV, feeling only pain. He called Jake every evening, but the conversations were short-lived, limited the time, citing school. On Friday, he picked up Jake for the weekend. He pulled up to Liv's apartment, but didn't get out, just honked the horn. Jake ran out and hugged him, but he looked tired. Dad, let's go get pizza, he asked, getting into the Mustang. Sure, buddy, Ethan replied, smiling. Where do you want to go? The one with the big chunks, Jake said, perking up, with pepperoni. Ethan nodded, and they drove to a local diner that smelled of dough and cheese. They sat at a corner table and ordered pizza and soda. Jake chatted about school, about how his team had lost a basketball game, but Ethan could tell his son wasn't as cheerful as he used to be. Dad, you're not playing now? Jake asked, looking at his plate as the pizza arrived. Ethan froze, then placed the piece on the plate. No, mate, he said. My knee gave out. Had to quit. Jake frowned, picking at the cheese. And Mom says you were always the best, he said quietly. Ethan forced himself to smile, even though his insides clenched. She's right, he said. But now I'll be the best for you, okay? Jake nodded, but his eyes were sad. Ethan looked at him, feeling guilty. He should have given his son more stability, a home, a family. But all he had were weekends and this old house. "Dad, are you staying here?" Jake asked, taking a bite of pizza. "In Texas?" "Yeah," Ethan said. "This is my new house. Want to see how it works tomorrow? We can paint your room." "Cool," Jake said, but without enthusiasm. "And Mom, she's not coming?" Ethan swallowed, choosing his words. "I don't know, buddy," he said. "She's with you when you're with her. And when you're with me, we do whatever you want. Deal." Jake nodded, but said nothing. Ethan looked at him, his heart aching. He wanted to say that everything would be okay, but he couldn't lie. Instead, he changed the subject. "Tell me about basketball," he said. "Who's your main star there?" Jake perked up as he started telling a story about a classmate who scored 3 points. Ethan listened, nodding, but inside he thought he had to find a new purpose. For Jake, for himself. The next day they went to the hardware store and bought paint for Jake's room blue, his favorite. Ethan fiddled with brushes while Jake smeared paint on the wall, laughing when some splashed on his face. "Dad, you're like an artist," Jake said, wiping his cheek. "And you're like a painter," Ethan replied, winking. "Come on, don't be lazy, paint evenly." Ethan Hayes sat at the kitchen table in his new Austin home, leafing through the local newspaper. His morning coffee had gone cold, but he didn't notice as he scanned the job listings. It had been a month since he'd retired from the NFL with a knee injury, and the money from the sale of his Los Angeles mansion was draining faster than he'd expected. He couldn't sit back not just for himself, but for Jake, who he took home on weekends. He needed a purpose, so his son wouldn't see him as a broken man, but as a father who was holding on. His eye caught the ad, "American football coach wanted for Austin High School. Experience with children preferred." Ethan paused, rereading the words. He wasn't sure he was ready to return to football, even at the high school level, but the idea of working with children seemed right. He wrote down the address and phone number, deciding to give it a try. That afternoon, he called the school and set up an interview. The next morning, Ethan put on the only shirt he had on that wasn't wrinkled and drove to school. The building looked old, with peeling paint on the walls, but the yard was full of children running and laughing. The principal, Mr. Wilson, an older man with tired eyes, met him in an office piled high with files. "Mr. Hayes," Wilson said, extending his hand. "I've heard of you. NFL linebacker, huh? What brings you to our dump?" Ethan shook his hand, sitting down opposite. "Life has changed," he replied, trying to sound confident. "A knee injury has knocked me out of the game. Now I'm looking for where I can be useful. I saw your ad in the paper." Wilson nodded, leafing through Ethan's hastily compiled resume. "Our team is weak," he said, leaning back in his chair. "The guys are trying, but without a coach, they're like a flock without a shepherd. Have you worked with kids before?" "Not really," Ethan admitted, "but I know football, and I know how to motivate myself. Give me a chance, and I'll get your team out there." Wilson looked at him, narrowing his eyes. "You're from the NFL, and this is a school league. There are no stars here, but boys who think about girls half the time. Can you handle it?" Ethan smiled for the first time that day. "I can handle it," he said. "I was that kid. They want to win, they just don't know how." Wilson chuckled but nodded. "Okay, Hayes, you're hired. You start tomorrow. But if the guys run away, don't expect a bonus." Ethan shook his hand, relieved. It wasn't the NFL, but it was a step forward. He returned home feeling something like hope for the first time in weeks. The next day, Ethan arrived at the school field, where the team had already assembled 15 teenagers aged 13 to 16 in tattered uniforms. They were chatting and kicking a ball, but fell silent when they saw him. Ethan whistled, getting their attention. "My name is Mr. Hayes," he said, crossing his arms. "I'm your new coach. Who here thinks they know football?" Several guys looked at each other, one, A lanky guy with a disheveled fringe raised his hand. "Me," he said. "I'm Alex. I play quarterback." "Great, Alex," Ethan said, throwing the ball to him. "Pass it." Alex caught the ball, but his throw was weak and the ball flew away. The boys laughed and Alex blushed. "Okay, stop laughing," Ethan said, picking up the ball. "Everyone starts like that. Today we're learning how to hold the ball and run straight. Let's go." He divided them into groups, showing them how to hold their bodies and make short passes. The boys were awkward, but their enthusiasm was infectious. Ethan shouted, corrected their movements, ran with them despite the pain in his knee. For the first time in months, he felt needed. "Mr. Hayes, am I doing this wrong?" Alex asked after another failed pass attempt. "Not wrong, just not all the way," Ethan replied, clapping him on the shoulder. "Look, lower body, higher elbow. Try again." Alex nodded and rushed forward. This time the ball flew more accurately. Ethan smiled, feeling a surge of energy. By the end of the training, the guys were exhausted, but they looked at him with respect. "Same time tomorrow," Ethan said, gathering up the balls. "And no lates." "You're cool, Mr. Hayes," one of the guys shouted, running into the locker room. Ethan shook his head, but smiled. It wasn't the NFL, but it was real. That evening, he picked up Jake, who was home for the weekend. Liv opened the door, her face pale, but she didn't look at Ethan. "He's ready," she said, stepping aside. Jake ran out, hugged his father, and climbed into the Mustang. "Dad, where are we going?" he asked, throwing his backpack on the back seat. "Home, buddy," Ethan replied, starting the car. "And then pizza, if you want." "Cool," Jake perked up. "With pepperoni?" "That's right," Ethan said with a wink. They stopped at a diner, ordered pizza, and sat down at a table. Jake chatted about school, but Ethan could tell he wasn't as cheerful as he used to be. After eating, they went back to Ethan's house, where Jake plopped down on the couch, leafing through a comic book. "Dad, are you a coach now?" he asked, without looking up from the page. "Yeah," Ethan said, opening a can of soda. "Teaching the kids how to play soccer. Want to come to practice tomorrow?" "Cool," Jake said, looking up. "Do you run them like you do in the NFL?" Ethan laughed, sitting down next to him. "Not really, but I'm strict. They're already afraid of my whistle." Jake smiled, but then his face became serious. "Dad, will Mom come back?" he asked quietly. Ethan froze, guilt tightening in his chest. He placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Mom loves you, Jake," he said. "But we're apart now. I'll always be here for you, buddy." Jake nodded, but looked down. Ethan hugged him, feeling his determination to be a better father overcome the pain. He couldn't bring Liv back or his career, but he could give Jake a father he could count on. The next day, they went to practice. Jake sat in the stands, chewing gum, while Ethan rallied the team. The guys tried to impress the new guy, but Alex messed up the pass again, and the ball flew into the net. "Mr. Hayes, am I hopeless?" he asked, puffing. "Nobody's hopeless," Ethan said, throwing him the ball. "Work on your elbow. Let's do it again." Jake chuckled from the stands, and Ethan winked at him. By the end of practice, the team was looking a little better, and Jake ran up to his father, beaming. "Dad, you're like a real coach," he said. "They listen to you." "Well, before we run away," Ethan replied, laughing, "let's go get some burgers." They sat in a cafe, munching burgers, and Jake told a story about how one of the players almost fell over while making a block. Ethan listened, feeling warm. These were small moments, but they kept him going. Ethan Hayes walked down the hallway of Austin High School, carrying a box of footballs. It was a noisy morning, with students crowded around their lockers, some laughing, some arguing. He'd grown accustomed to the hustle and bustle of the school after 2 weeks as a coach, but he still felt out of place. His team was making progress, and that gave him purpose, but the emptiness of a divorce and injury lingered. Today, he was supposed to pick up the footballs from the staff room, but he noticed one had rolled into history class. Ethan peered through the open door. The new teacher, Emily Walker, was standing at the board, explaining something about the Civil War. She was younger than him, about 30, with short hair and a direct gaze that was immediately noticeable. The class, full of 13-year-olds, listened to her with unusual attention, and when she made jokes, they laughed. Miss Walker, was Lincoln really that tall? Asked a guy in the back row, grinning. Higher than you think, Harry, Emily replied, crossing her arms. But not higher than Mr. Hayes, so don't get too comfortable. The class laughed as they saw Ethan in the doorway. He smiled, adjusting his cap, and walked in, picking up the ball. Sorry to interrupt, he said. One of mine rolled away. Emily looked at him, her eyebrow raising slightly. Coach, are you losing the balls? She said, grinning. I didn't think football players were so absent-minded. Only when they're in history class, Ethan said, playing along. Not a bad lesson, by the way. I didn't think war could be so alive. The class chuckled and Emily crossed her arms, her tone slightly caustic. Thank you, Coach. I will try. And you seem to like to keep everything under control, huh? Ethan raised his eyebrows but decided not to argue. Maybe so, he said, smiling. Okay, I won't disturb you. Harry, don't fall asleep in class. Harry blushed, and the class laughed again. Ethan left, but Emily's smile remained in his mind. She was not like the other teachers, straightforward, with a slight mockery, but without malice. He felt something warm, something he had not felt for a long time. After practice, Ethan stopped by the staff room for coffee. His team had worked hard today, and he was pleased, even though Alex, their quarterback, was still throwing crooked balls. In the staff room, Emily stood at the coffee machine, fiddling with the buttons. Damn car, she muttered, hitting the side. Why does everything break down here? Ethan walked over, suppressing a smile. Allow me, he said, pressing a couple of buttons. The machine buzzed and coffee poured into the mug. You have to know the approach. Emily looked at him, narrowing her eyes. Well, thanks, Coach, she said, taking the mug. Now I owe you one. Coffee's fine, Ethan replied, pouring himself a cup. The machine isn't completely disgusting, if you know the secret. They sat down at a table in the corner of the staff room. Emily sipped her coffee and grimaced. Is this gasoline? She said, but took another sip. Okay, that'll do. How's your team? Did they run away when you blew their whistle? Ethan chuckled, twirling his mug in his hands. They're holding up so far, he said. The guys are clumsy, but they're trying. One of them, Alex, thinks he's a star, but he throws like a first grader. Emily laughed, her eyes sparkling. That sounds like my students, she said. Half of them think they know more history than I do. Today, Harry said Lincoln invented the telephone. Seriously, Ethan said, smirking. Maybe he was just testing you. Yeah, testing how far I could roll my eyes, Emily said. But they're good. You just have to find a way to get to them. Ethan nodded, feeling the conversation flow easily. He wasn't used to chatting with people after moving, but with Emily, it was different. How long have you been in Austin? He asked, sipping his coffee. Emily looked into her mug, her smile fading. A couple of months, she said. Moved after my husband died. He was in the military. He died 2 years ago. That left me and my son, Jason. He's 5. Ethan froze, not expecting such candor. He felt a pang of guilt for his question, but her tone was calm, not self-pitying. I'm so sorry, he said quietly. It's hard. Yeah, she said with a shrug. But life doesn't stop. School helps. Jason's here in elementary, so I'm close to him. What about you? What brings an NFL star to our rundown town? Ethan chuckled, but her directness was appealing. He decided to be honest. Divorce, injury, moving, he said, looking into his coffee. Lost my career, my wife, pretty much everything. If it weren't for my son, Jake, I probably wouldn't have left the house at all. Emily looked at him, her gaze softening, but not pitying. I guess you and I aren't so different, she said. We both know what it's like to lose everything and start over. Ethan nodded, feeling warm. For the first time in months, he didn't feel alone. They sat in silence, finishing their coffee, but the silence was comfortable. "Okay, coach," Emily said, standing up. "Don't relax. If your team loses, I'm going to tell Harry that Lincoln was the better quarterback." Ethan laughed, shaking his head. "It's a deal, Miss Walker," he said. "But if your students fail the test, I'll say you haven't taught them." She smirked and walked out, leaving him with a smile. Ethan finished his coffee, feeling like the day had gotten a little easier. On Friday, he picked up Jake, who was visiting for the weekend. Liv opened the door, but didn't look at him. "He's ready," she said, walking away. Jake ran out, hugged his dad, and jumped into the Mustang. "Dad, what are we going to do?" he asked, throwing his backpack back. "Pizza first, then a movie," Ethan replied, starting the car. "What do you think of the plan?" "Cool," said Jake, perking up. "Can I see a horror movie?" "Only if you don't hide under the covers," Ethan said with a wink. They stopped at a diner and ordered pepperoni pizza. Jake chatted about school, but Ethan noticed that he avoided talking about Liv. After eating, they returned home, where Jake plopped down on the couch. "Dad, are you really a coach?" he asked, leafing through the comic. "Sure," Ethan said, opening a soda. "Teaching the kids how to play. Want to come practice tomorrow?" "Yeah," Jake said, perking up. "And you yell at them like they do in the NFL?" "Not exactly," Ethan laughed. "But my whistle is loud. They're already afraid of being late." Jake chuckled, but then fell silent. "Dad and Mom, does she miss you?" he asked quietly. Ethan sat down next to her, guilt weighing on his chest. "Of course, buddy," he said. "She loves you. But we're apart now. I'm with you, and that's the main thing, right?" Jake nodded, but didn't look at him. Ethan hugged him, his determination to be a better father overcoming the pain. The next day, they went to practice. Jake sat in the stands chewing gum while Ethan rallied the team. Alex messed up the pass again, and the ball went into the net. "Mr. Hayes, am I hopeless?" he asked, puffing. "Nobody's hopeless," Ethan replied, throwing him the ball. "Elbow up, try again." Jake laughed from the stands, and Ethan winked at him. After practice, Emily walked past the field carrying a stack of notebooks. "Coach, your guys look almost like a team," she said, smirking. "Do your students still think Lincoln invented the telephone?" Ethan replied, smiling. She rolled her eyes, but stopped. "Jason's in after school today," she said. "If you and Jake, I want to get coffee. At a cafe, not from this infernal machine." Ethan looked at Jake, who ran up, beaming. "Dad, can I?" he asked. "Okay," Ethan said, feeling the warmth. "Lead the way, Miss Walker." They went to a nearby cafe where Emily picked up Jason, a 5-year-old boy with her dark hair. The children chatted while Ethan and Emily drank coffee and joked. Ethan Hayes sat at the kitchen table in his Austin home, staring at his laptop. He was trying to write a practice plan for his high school football team, but his thoughts were racing. It had been a month since he started coaching, and the job gave him purpose, but the emptiness of his divorce and the loss of his career still weighed heavily on him. Jake, his 10-year-old son, was the only thing keeping him going, but their weekend visits seemed too short. He had just gotten off the phone with Jake, who had been talking about a school art show, but he had sounded sad. Ethan felt guilty that he couldn't be around more often. His phone vibrated and Liv's number appeared on the screen. Ethan frowned but answered, trying to keep his voice even. "Hey, Liv," he said, pushing the laptop away. "What happened?" Her voice was cold and businesslike, like that of a person who had already decided everything for both of them. "Ethan, we need to talk about Jake," she said. "He needs to live with me full-time. You can't give him stability." Ethan clutched the phone, feeling his anger rise. He took a deep breath to keep from losing his temper. "I'm his father, Liv," he said, trying to sound calm. "I need him, and he needs me." "You're always training," she said, her tone sharp. And now there's this Austin of yours. Jake needs a normal life, school, friends, a routine. I can give that to him. Ethan gritted his teeth, her words hitting a raw nerve. He knew moving to Austin and taking a new job had changed his life, but he was trying for Jake. You destroyed our family, he said, but immediately regretted his harshness. Listen, I don't want to fight. Let's make a deal. I'll take him for the weekends, the holidays. He needs to know he has a father. Liv was silent, and Ethan heard her sigh. Her voice was quieter, but still firm. Okay, she said, but if you miss one day off, I'll sue. Jake needs stability, not your promises. I won't let him down, he answered firmly. I've never let him down. We'll see, she said, and the connection was cut off. Ethan threw his phone on the table, clenching his fists. He stared at the photo of Jake on the fridge, a boy in his soccer uniform, smiling at the camera. Liv blamed him for her loneliness, and it made him wonder. Maybe he really was too busy with his career. Between practices, games, travel, he was rarely home. But that didn't excuse her cheating. He started to text her, asking if they could meet up to discuss their schedule, but stopped. There was no point in arguing now. Better to give her time and give himself a chance to move on. Ethan got up to make coffee, but his thoughts were interrupted by the doorbell. He opened it to find Jake standing there with a backpack. Liv was supposed to bring him over for the weekend, but he wasn't expecting them this early. Dad, Jake said, hugging him. Mom said she had something to do and brought me here now. Ethan frowned but smiled at his son. Cool, buddy, he said, taking the backpack. Come on in. Want some pizza? With pepperoni? Jake asked, perking up. That's right, Ethan replied, patting him on the head. They sat in the living room and Jake turned on the TV, choosing a cartoon. Ethan ordered pizza, but his mind was on his conversation with Liv. She hadn't even warned him that she would bring Jake early. He looked at his son, who was laughing at the cartoon, and felt guilty. Jake shouldn't have to suffer because of their fights. Dad, why are you silent? Jake asked, turning to him. Just thinking, Ethan said, smiling. How's school? Tell me about the exhibit. Jake perked up as he started talking about his Mars project. Ethan listened, nodding, but inside he was fighting the urge to call Liv and tell her everything. He didn't want war, but her words about stability hurt. He was a father, and Jake was his world. When the pizza arrived, they sat down at the table. Jake chewed, waving his arms. Dad, did you see my drawing? He asked. I drew a Martian base. Miss Harris gave me an A. Seriously, Ethan said, smiling. Show me, I want to see it. Jake ran for his backpack and pulled out a piece of paper with a bright picture of the red planet, domes, rovers. Ethan praised it, but noticed that his son had fallen silent, looking at the pizza. Dad, does Mom really want me to live with her? He asked quietly. Ethan froze, placing the piece on his plate. She said that? He asked, trying not to show his anger. Well, she said I should be with her, Jake said, looking at the table. But I want to be with you too. Ethan swallowed, choosing his words. Mate, your mom and I have an agreement, he said. You'll be with her, but on weekends and holidays, you'll be with me. You're always my son, okay? Jake nodded but didn't look up. Ethan put a hand on his shoulder. We're a team, he said, and I'm not going anywhere. Jake smiled, but it was weak. Ethan looked at him, feeling his resolve harden. He wouldn't let Liv take their son away for good. But there was no point in arguing over the phone. They had to meet. The next day, after practice, Ethan decided to call Liv. He was sitting in his car outside the school while Jake was at after school. Liv answered on the third ring. What, Ethan? She asked, her voice tired. We need to meet, he said, trying to sound calm. About Jake, I don't want to fight, but he needs to know he has a father. I told you, she replied. If you miss the weekend, I'll sue. I won't miss it, Ethan said, gripping the wheel. But you can't decide for him. He wants to be with both of us. Liv was silent, then her voice softened. Ethan, I don't want to hurt him, she said. But you went to Austin. You have a new life, a job, and I'm here with him every day. You chose this life, he said, but then stopped. Listen, let's not talk on the phone. Let's meet tomorrow when I bring Jake. We'll discuss the schedule. Okay, she answered after a pause. Tomorrow at 6. Ethan hung up, relieved but also angry. Liv blamed him, but he knew he wasn't the perfect husband. Between training, playing, and traveling, he left her alone too often. It didn't excuse her cheating, but it made him wonder. Maybe he could have been more considerate. That evening, he picked up Jake from after-school care, and they drove home. Jake chatted about the practice he had seen and how Alex had almost dropped the ball. "Dad, you're a strict coach," he said, laughing. "They're afraid of you." "They don't fear them, they respect them," Ethan replied with a wink. "Want to come with me tomorrow? I'll show them how to pass." "Yeah," said Jake, perking up. "Can I try it too?" "Sure," Ethan said, "but only if you don't brag." Jake chuckled, and Ethan felt warm. These moments with his son were what he held on for. But the conversation with Liv hung over him like a cloud. He knew he had to be careful not to lose Jake. The next day, after practice, Ethan dropped Jake off at Liv's. She was waiting at the door, her face tense, but she smiled at her son. "Hey, honey," she said, hugging Jake. "How was your weekend?" "Cool," Jake said, but he looked at Ethan. "Dad, are you coming next Friday?" "Of course," Ethan replied, patting him on the head. Liv looked at Ethan, her eyes tired. "Let's go talk," she said, nodding towards the kitchen. They walked in, leaving Jake in the living room watching cartoons. Liv poured coffee, but didn't offer Ethan any. "I'm serious, Ethan," she said, crossing her arms. "Jake needs stability. I don't want him bouncing around." "And I don't want him to grow up without a father," he answered, trying not to raise his voice. "We agreed weekends, holidays. I won't miss a day." "You weren't there when we were a family," she said, her voice breaking. "Always practices, games. I was alone." Ethan clenched his fists, but forced himself to answer calmly. "You made your choice, Liv," he said. "But Jake is not your property. He is my son, and I will stand by him." Liv turned away, wiping her eyes. "I don't want to quarrel," she said, "for his sake. But if you can't, I'll do everything to make him stay with me." "I can do it," Ethan said firmly. "I'll send you the schedule tomorrow, and don't try to cut me off." Ethan Hayes stood on the Austin High School football field, a whistle dangling from his neck and his arms crossed over his chest. The morning air was chilly, but the team, 17 teenagers in tattered uniforms, was already huffing and puffing, throwing short passes. It had been 2 months since Ethan had become a coach, and his life was beginning to take on a new rhythm. Running the team gave him purpose, and weekends with Jake, his 10-year-old son, gave him meaning. But the conversation with Liv, his ex-wife, was still buzzing in his head. Her demand for full custody of Jake and accusations of instability had hit a raw nerve. "Alex, elbow up," Ethan yelled, noticing their quarterback botched another pass. "You're not playing basketball." Alex, a lanky guy with a shaggy fringe, blushed but nodded. "Got it, Mr. Hayes," he said, snatching the ball. "Again." "10 more times," Ethan replied, but he smiled. "Come on, don't be shy." The team was improving. In the beginning, they could barely make an accurate pass, but now they were winning local games, albeit with difficulty. The guys respected Ethan for his honesty. He didn't coddle, but he didn't humiliate. He always showed how to correct mistakes. Today, they were preparing for a game against a neighboring school, and the tension was felt in every movement. "Mr. Hayes, what if we lose?" asked Trevor, a short but quick player, wiping sweat from his face. "You won't lose if you listen," Ethan replied, crossing his arms. "They're stronger on offense, but you're faster. Use that. Now run 3 laps around the field." The boys groaned but ran. Ethan watched them, feeling proud. This wasn't the NFL, but watching them grow was almost as cool. After practice, Ethan walked into the staff room where Emily Walker, the history teacher, was drinking coffee and flipping through her notebooks. Their friendship had been growing since they first met a month ago. Emily was straightforward, with a hint of mockery, but her warm gaze made her seem close. She looked up when she saw him. "Coach, are your boys still running?" she asked, grinning. "I saw them huffing and puffing on the field." "They're holding up," Ethan replied, pouring himself some coffee. "Do your students still think Lincoln invented the telephone?" Emily rolled her eyes but smiled. "Harry now claims Lincoln was a rapper," she said. "But I'm not giving up. How's your game tomorrow?" "It's going to be hot," Ethan said, sitting down opposite. "The opposition is tough, but my guys are ready. Will you come watch?" "Maybe," she said with a shrug, "if Jason doesn't start a mutiny. He said yesterday that he wanted to be a pirate instead of going to kindergarten." Ethan laughed at the image of her 5-year-old son with a toy sword. "Bring him," he said. "Jake will be on the stand. They'll find something to do." Emily nodded, but her gaze became more serious. I don't know better," she said. "Is the team reviving you?" Ethan took a sip of his coffee, thinking. "Yeah," he admitted. "They remind me why I do this. And Jake. Without him, I'd probably still be watching old games and drinking beer." Emily smiled, but her tone was direct. "That's good, Ethan. But don't forget about yourself. You're not just a coach and a dad." He looked at her, feeling the warmth of her words, but didn't respond. Emily stood up, gathering her notebooks. "Good luck tomorrow," she said, "and don't yell at your boys too much. They're scared of you anyway." "Respected, not feared," Ethan corrected, grinning. She rolled her eyes and walked out, leaving him with a slight smile. On Friday, Ethan stopped by to pick up Jake. Liv opened the door, her face tense, but she nodded silently. Jake ran out, hugged his dad, and jumped into the Mustang. "Dad, is there a game tomorrow?" he asked, throwing his backpack back. "I want to watch." "Yeah, buddy," Ethan said, starting the car. "You're gonna be my biggest cheerleader." "Cool," Jake said, perking up. "Will your team win?" "If they don't throw the ball into the stands," Ethan replied with a wink. They picked up pizza and sat at home, and Jake talked about school. Ethan listened, feeling his son getting closer. But the conversation with Liv was still buzzing in his head. Her threat to sue him if he missed the weekend was angering him, but he knew he wouldn't give her a reason. The next day, the field was packed with fans' parents, students, teachers. Emily came with Jason, her son, who was fiddling with her hand. Jake waved to them from the stands, and Ethan smiled when he saw them. The game started off tense. The opposing team, a team from a nearby school, was pressing, but Ethan's boys held their ground. Alex, despite some crooked passes, made a perfect throw, and Trevor caught the ball for a point. The stands erupted. "Come on, Alex," Ethan called from the sidelines. "Again, don't relax." But the second half was a mess. Alex tripped, missing an interception, and the opposing team tied the game. Ethan blew the whistle for a timeout. "Listen up," he said, looking at the breathless boys. "You're faster than them. Don't panic, play smart. Trevor, run left. Alex, throw it shorter. Got it." "Got it, coach," Alex nodded, wiping away his sweat. Ethan clapped him on the shoulder. "Show them who's boss." The game resumed, and the team came alive. Trevor broke through the defense, and Alex threw a pass that led to a touchdown. The final seconds were tense, but they held on. The final whistle blew, and the crowd roared. The boys rushed to hug each other, and Ethan looked on, feeling proud. Jake ran up, beaming. "Dad, you're a cool coach," he shouted, jumping on him. Ethan hugged him, laughing. "They're the cool ones, buddy," he said. "But thanks." Emily walked over holding Jason's hand. "Not bad, coach," she said, grinning. "But your Alex almost ruined the game." "He's learning," Ethan replied with a shrug. "What, are you a football expert now?" "I'm an expert on everything," she said, rolling her eyes. "Jason wants your quarterback's autograph." "Really?" Ethan said, looking at the boy hiding behind his mother. Alex will love this. They walked over to the team, where Alex, still huffing, signed Jason's shirt. Emily watched, her smile warm, but she quickly changed the subject. "Ethan, you're too hard on them," she said as the children ran off to play. "They're kids, not pros." "Strictness teaches discipline," he replied, but her words hurt. "They want to win themselves." "Winning is great," she said, her tone direct. "But if you drive them, they'll hate football. Let them breathe." Ethan frowned but nodded. "Maybe you're right," he said. "I'll think about it." She smiled, but not mockingly. "That's a good girl," she said. "Okay, we have to go. Jason, let's go." Ethan watched them go, feeling a mixture of irritation and gratitude. Emily wasn't afraid to speak her mind, and it made him think. He turned to Jake, who was chatting with Alex. "Dad, can I stay a little longer?" Jake asked, beaming. "5 minutes," Ethan said. "Then home, we have a movie tonight." Ethan Hayes stood in the locker room of the Austin High School stadium, looking at his team. 17 teenagers, sweaty and nervous, sat on the benches, adjusting their knee pads and helmets. It was the high school championship game, their first big game of the season, and the opponent, West Austin High, was a cut above the rest. Ethan, the coach, felt the pressure, but he didn't show it. In 3 months, he had turned these awkward kids into a team that could compete. But today, it all depended on their spirit. "Listen up," Ethan said, crossing his arms. "You made it to the finals because you worked hard. The other team thinks they can crush us, but they don't know you. Play smart, play together. Got that?" "Roger that, coach," Alex, their quarterback, shouted, slamming his fist on his helmet. The others hooted in support. Ethan nodded, but noticed that Trevor, a fast runner, was looking at the floor. He knew the kid was nervous. He'd missed a key pass in the last game. "Trevor, keep your head up," Ethan said, looking at him. "You're the fastest guy on the field. Do your job, and everything will be fine." Trevor nodded, but without conviction. Ethan clapped his hands. "Come on, guys, show us who's boss." The team poured onto the field to a roar from the stands. Ethan looked around the crowd, parents, students, teachers. Jake, his son, sat in the stands waving a homemade sign that read, "Go Dad." Nearby were Emily Walker, the history teacher, and her 5-year-old son, Jason, who was fiddling with her arm. Emily caught Ethan's eye and winked, her grin saying, "Don't screw this up." Ethan smiled, feeling the warmth. Their friendship, which had begun over coffee in the staff room, had become a rock, though he wasn't ready to call it anything more. The game started with a kick. The opponents, tall and aggressive, immediately went on the attack, earning quick points. Ethan shouted from the sidelines, adjusting the defense. "Alex, watch the flanks," he yelled. "Don't let them break through." Alex nodded, but his first pass went past Trevor and was intercepted. The crowd groaned and Ethan gritted his teeth. He called for a timeout. "Easy, boys," he said, looking at their tense faces. "They're pressing, but you're faster. Trevor, take the left flank, Alex. Keep it short. Stay focused." "I screwed up, coach," Trevor muttered, looking at the ground. "You're not done yet," Ethan said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Do it for the team." The game resumed, and the team came alive. Alex made a perfect pass, and Trevor broke through the defense for the first points. The stands roared, and Jake started yelling, waving his sign. Ethan looked at him, feeling proud. But before the end of the first half, the opponents were ahead again, and the score was 14-7. In the locker room, Ethan gathered the team, which looked exhausted. "You hang in there," he said, crossing his arms. "But we're losing the ball on interceptions. Alex, trust Trevor. He won't let you down. Defense, don't let them breathe. The second half is yours. Got it." "Got it," the boys shouted, but their voices were quieter. Ethan noticed Alex and Trevor exchange glances. He knew there was tension between them, Alex blaming Trevor for missed passes and Trevor getting mad at Alex for missed throws. "Hey, you two," Ethan said, pointing at them. "Stop squabbling. You're a team. Work together or we're screwed." Okay, coach, Alex said, nodding. Trevor was silent, but nodded too. The second half started with a mistake. The defense missed a breakthrough, and the score became 21-7. Ethan shouted, adjusting positions, but he saw how the boys were losing confidence. He called a timeout, feeling his heart pounding. Listen, he said, looking at their sweaty faces. You're as good as they are. They're tired, and you're not. Trevor, take the wing. Alex, throw it straight. Guard, hold the center. You can do it. The boys nodded, and the game came alive. Alex threw a short pass. Trevor caught it and ran for the end zone, cutting the lead to 21-14. The crowd erupted, and Jake and Jason jumped up and down. Emily clapped, her smile wider than ever. Ethan felt a surge of energy, but he knew time was running out. The last 5 minutes were chaotic. The opposition was pressing, but Ethan's defense held. With a minute left, Alex got the ball, stepped back, and threw a long pass. Trevor, dodging a tackle, caught it and sprinted toward the end zone. Ethan held his breath as Trevor leapt through the defense. Touchdown. The score was tied, and an extra kick gave the team the win, 22-21. The stands erupted in screams. The kids threw themselves into hugs, helmets flying. Ethan watched, his throat tightening. Jake ran up, jumping on his father. You're the best, Dad, he shouted, hugging him. Ethan hugged his son, laughing, his eyes wet. They're the best, mate, he said, gesturing to the team. But thanks. Emily walked over holding Jason's hand. Her son was fiddling with his shirt, beaming. Not bad, coach, she said, her voice warm but with the usual mockery. I thought you were going to lose. Yeah, you'd be reminding me of that forever, Ethan replied, grinning. Emily stepped closer and, unexpectedly for him, hugged him. It was quick, but her warmth remained on his shoulder. Seriously, you're great, she said, pulling away. They adore you. Ethan nodded, feeling something inside him come alive. He glanced at Jake, who was chatting with Alex, and Emily, who was adjusting Jason's hat. For the first time in months, he didn't feel broken. Dad, can I come with the guys? Jake asked, pointing to the team celebrating. 5 minutes, Ethan said with a wink. Then home, we've got burgers tonight. Jake ran away and Emily looked at Ethan, her gaze more serious. You look, I don't know, alive, she said. This victory isn't just for them, is it? Ethan shrugged but didn't deny it. Maybe, he said. They give me a purpose. And Jake, I couldn't do it without him. And I thought it was my coffee that was saving you, she said, grinning. Well, coffee helps too, he replied, laughing. Emily shook her head, but her smile was warm. Okay, Coach, Jason and I are going home, she said. But if you're going to celebrate, invite me. I don't mind a burger. It's a deal, Ethan said, feeling her words warm him. She walked away, leading Jason by the hand, and Ethan looked out at the field where his team was still hugging. Alex ran up, out of breath. Mr. Hayes, we did it, he shouted. Did you see my pass? I saw it, Ethan said, clapping him on the shoulder. But don't relax. Next season will be tougher. Alex grinned and ran off to join the boys. Ethan turned to Jake, who came back beaming. Dad, that was awesome, he said. Have you always won like this in the NFL? Not always, Ethan replied, smiling. But with you on the podium, definitely. They walked to the car, and Ethan felt his life coming back. The win, Jake's smile, Emily's support, these were steps forward. He knew there was more work to do, but today he wasn't just a former player or a divorced dad. He was a coach who had led a team to victory, and a father who was a hero to his son. Ethan Hayes sat on the couch in his Austin home, flipping through a sports magazine but not reading. It was a quiet evening, save for the ticking of the kitchen clock. Jake, his 10-year-old son, was at his ex-wife Liv's, and Ethan was looking forward to the weekend to pick him up. He felt more confident after his high school team won the championship, but the emptiness of his divorce and leaving the NFL still weighed heavily on him. His coaching and time with Jake had kept him afloat, but he knew he wasn't quite back on his feet yet. The phone rang and Ethan frowned when he saw the number for Coach Robertson, his old mentor from the NFL. He answered, trying to sound cheerful. "Hey, Coach," he said, putting the magazine down. "Long time no see. What's new?" "Hayes, are you still hiding in Texas?" Robertson said, his voice hoarse but warm. "I have news for you." Ethan smiled, feeling a familiar warmth from the old man's gruff tone. "I'm not hiding, I'm alive," he replied. "What's the news?" "There's a Veterans Night in Los Angeles in 2 weeks," Robertson said. "We're bringing together everyone who played for our team. They want to see you. Will you come?" Ethan froze, his smile fading. Los Angeles was the city of his past, his career, his family, his pain. Going back there would reopen the wounds, Liv's betrayal, his knee injury, Jake's trial. He clutched the phone, searching for words. "I don't know, Coach," he said, trying not to show the tension. "I'm busy here. School team, you know. The finals just happened." "Hayes, don't talk nonsense," Robertson interrupted, his voice becoming stern. "This isn't just a party. The guys want to see Molat. You were a star, and they haven't forgotten. Plus, there'll be press, sponsors. Maybe you'll find something for yourself, a job, connections." Ethan chuckled, but his insides sank. The Hammer, his NFL nickname, felt foreign now, like an old suit that didn't fit. "I'll think about it," he said. "Thanks for inviting me. Give me a couple of days, okay?" "2 days, Hayes," Robertson said. "Don't drag it out. And don't sit there alone like an old log. Call me when you've decided." Ethan hung up, looking at the phone. Los Angeles was like another world, the stadiums, the flashing cameras, his life with Liv and Jake. He hadn't been there since he'd sold the mansion and moved to Austin. Going back meant facing the past, and he wasn't sure he was ready. The next day, Ethan arrived at the school where his team was preparing for the new season. The kids were running laps, and he stood on the sideline, honking his whistle. Alex, the quarterback, messed up another pass, and Ethan yelled, "Elbow up, Alex. You're not playing basketball." Alex grinned, then corrected himself. Ethan watched them, feeling proud, but thinking about Robertson's call. After practice, he went into the staff room where Emily Walker, the history teacher, was grading notebooks. Her short hair was disheveled and her eyes were tired, but she smiled when she saw him. "Coach, what's with that sour face?" she asked, taking a sip of coffee. "Are your boys throwing balls into the stands again?" "No worse than your students who think Lincoln was a rapper," Ethan replied, pouring himself a cup of coffee. He sat down across from her, feeling like he could be frank with her. "My old coach called yesterday. He wanted me to come to L.A. for a Veterans Night." Emily raised her eyebrows, her eyes lighting up with interest. "NFL veterans? Cool," she said. "Will you come?" Ethan shrugged, twirling his mug in his hands. "I don't know," he said. "Lay, my whole past is there. My career, Liv, Jake. I'm not sure I want to dig into it." Emily looked at him, her tone becoming more serious. "Ethan, you're not stirring things up. You're showing that you're standing up," she said. "You left the NFL, you moved, you became a coach. That's not weakness, that's strength. They need to see that the hammer hasn't broken." Ethan chuckled, her words hurt, but he wasn't sure. "The hammer was a long time ago," he said. "Now I'm just a coach at the school, and a father who sees his son on weekends." "And that's cool," Emily said, her voice direct. "But you can't hide from the past. Go show them you're more than just the past. And it'll show Jake you're not giving up." Ethan looked at her, feeling her words cut through his doubts. Emily always spoke directly, and it made him think. "What if I see Liv?" he asked quietly. "She's there with Jake. I don't want to fight again." Emily shrugged, but her gaze was warm. "Then rise above it," she said. "You're not going for her, you're going for yourself. And Jake, he'll be proud." Ethan nodded but didn't answer. Emily stood up, gathering her notebooks. "Think about it, Coach," she said, smirking. "Or I'll tell Harry you're scared." "Yeah, give it a try," Ethan replied, smiling. She left, and he stayed with his coffee, looking out the window. Emily was right, this was his chance to prove he wasn't broken. But the thought of Los Angeles was still terrifying. On Friday, Ethan stopped by to pick up Jake. Liv opened the door, her face tired, but she didn't look at him. "He's ready," she said, walking away. Jake ran out, hugged his dad, and jumped into the Mustang. "Dad, what are we doing?" he asked, throwing his backpack back. "Burgers first, then a movie," Ethan replied, starting the car. "And maybe training tomorrow." "Cool," Jake said, perking up. "Is your team going to win again?" "If Alex doesn't throw it into the stands," Ethan replied with a wink. They stopped at a cafe and ordered burgers and fries. Jake chatted about school, but Ethan decided to tell about Robertson's call. "My old coach called me, man," he said, chewing. "He wants me to come to LA for a veterans night. I want to take you. What do you think?" Jake froze, his eyes lighting up. "Los Angeles?" he asked. "Where did you play?" "Cool. Will Mom be there?" Ethan swallowed, choosing his words. "Maybe," he said. "But this is about football. I want to show you where I was a star." "Yeah, let's go," Jake said, beaming. "I want to see the stadium." Ethan smiled, but his insides sank. Jake was thrilled, but the thought of meeting Liv was terrifying. He knew he had to be strong for his son. That evening, they watched a comedy and Jake laughed, spilling his soda. Ethan looked at him, feeling warm. The decision to go to Los Angeles was growing stronger, but he decided to talk to Emily one more time. The next day after training, he walked into her classroom where she was sorting out posters. "Emily, can I speak for a minute?" he asked, adjusting his cap. "Coach, what's with that serious face?" she said, putting down the marker. "Did Alex drop the ball again?" "Not this time," Ethan said, smiling. "I mean Los Angeles. I'm thinking about going, but I don't know if I'm ready." Emily crossed her arms, her gaze direct. "Ethan, you're ready," she said. "This isn't about Liv or the NFL. This is about you. You're standing up, and they need to see that. And if Liv's out there, stand taller. For Jake." Ethan nodded, her words like a push. "You're always so direct," he said. "It's annoying, you know." "I know," she replied, grinning. "But it works." "It works," he agreed, feeling relieved. "Jake wants to go. I think that's a sign." "That's a clever girl," Emily said. "Bring me a magnet from California, and don't screw up there." Ethan laughed, shaking his head. "We have a deal," he said. She went back to the posters, and he walked out, his resolve growing. Los Angeles was scary, but Emily and Jake were right. This was his chance to show he wasn't broken. He would call Robertson tomorrow and confirm. For himself, for his son, for the future. Ethan Hayes stood in front of the mirror in his Los Angeles hotel room, adjusting his tie. His hands shook slightly, but he forced himself to breathe evenly. NFL senior night was in an hour, and he hadn't been in a room like this since he'd left the league almost a year ago. Los Angeles, the city of his glory and pain, felt foreign. He'd come here for Jake, his 10-year-old son, and to prove to himself that he wasn't broken. But the thought of seeing Liv, his ex-wife, and his old teammates made his heart beat faster. "Dad, you ready?" Jake asked, bursting into the room. He was wearing a t-shirt with a logo of their old team, his eyes shining with excitement. "There's going to be a lot of players there, right?" Ethan smiled, patting his son on the head. "Yeah, man," he said, tightening his tie. "But don't jump on them for autographs, okay? They're old and grumpy now." "How are you?" Jake chuckled, dodging a slap on the back of the head. "Hey, I'm still young," Ethan said, grinning. "Come on, we have to be on time." They walked down to the lobby where Coach Robertson was waiting, gray-haired and loud as ever, his eyes lighting up when he saw Ethan. "Hayes, damn it," he said, clapping him on the shoulder. "You look like a man, not a Texas hermit. Is this your boyfriend?" "Yeah, Jake," Ethan said, nudging his son forward. "Jake, this is Coach Robertson. He's been yelling at me for 10 years. "Hey," Jake said, shaking hands. Dad says you're cool. Robertson laughed, his voice booming through the hall. Your old man was a star, kid, he said. Come on, the crowd is buzzing. They walked into the UCLA banquet hall, which was decorated with flags and banners, NFL veterans, team pride. The tables were full coaches, players, their families, reporters. Ethan recognized familiar faces. Marcus, his old captain, several of the quarterbacks he'd shared the field with. But his gaze caught on Liv, sitting in the front row with Jake. She looked tired, her eyes downcast, but she smiled at her son when he waved. Ethan looked away, his stomach clenching. He wasn't ready for the conversation, but he knew there was no avoiding it. Marcus ran up and hugged him, almost breaking his ribs. Hammer, you're alive, he shouted, grinning. Where have you been? Texas, seriously? Yeah, Marcus, Ethan said, smiling. I'm the high school coach now. Are you still wearing a helmet? Just for the pictures, Marcus replied with a wink. I heard you were performing. Don't screw up, bro. Ethan nodded, but his stomach clenched. Robertson had insisted he say a few words, and he had prepared a speech, but standing in front of hundreds of people who knew him as a star was terrifying. He looked at Jake, who was chatting with Liv, and felt a sense of determination. This was for his son. The ceremony began with speeches from the organizers, then videos were shown old matches where Ethan had knocked down opponents, earning ovations. He watched the screen, feeling a mixture of pride and pain. The guy, the Hammer, seemed like an outsider. When the host called his name, the crowd applauded, and Ethan stood up, adjusting his jacket. He walked to the microphone, looking at the faces Robertson, Marcus, Liv, Jake. His son smiled, and it gave him strength. Hello, everyone, he began, his voice slightly hoarse. Thank you for inviting me. Honestly, I didn't think I'd come back here. A year ago, I was somewhere else. Lost my career, my family, almost everything. The room fell silent, and Ethan swallowed, feeling the words coming hard. A knee injury knocked me out of the NFL, he continued. The divorce took my house. The court decided my son wouldn't live with me. I went to Austin, thinking that was the end. But I was wrong. The key is not to fall, but to get up. I became a high school coach, teaching kids how to play. They're not stars, but they fight like we used to. And my son, Jake, he looked at him, he reminds me why I get up every morning. Jake smiled, and the crowd applauded. Ethan felt the tension ease. Thanks to my friends, he said, nodding at Marcus. Coach Robertson, who didn't let me hide, and Emily, my friend in Austin, who kicks me when I whine. The room laughed, and Ethan smiled, feeling lighter. I'm not the Hammer I was, he finished, but I'm still in the game. Thank you for that. He stepped away from the microphone, and the room erupted in applause. Ethan returned to his desk, his heart pounding. Marcus slapped him on the back. Brother, you tore it, he said. I almost cried. Shut up, Ethan muttered, but he smiled. Jake ran up and hugged him. Dad, that was awesome, he said. You really are a star. Just for you, buddy, Ethan replied, patting him on the head. The evening continued with toasts, conversation, and laughter. Ethan chatted with Marcus and the other players, but noticed Liv walking toward him. She looked guilty, her hands fiddling nervously with her purse. Jake was with Robertson, looking at old trophies. Ethan, can we talk? She asked quietly. He nodded, feeling the tension. Okay, he said, walking away with her to the corner of the room. What? Liv looked at him, her eyes wet. I was wrong, she said, her voice shaking. Everything I did, to Christian, to us. I didn't mean to break you. I'm sorry. Ethan looked at her, feeling a mixture of anger and weariness. Her words were sincere, but the pain of betrayal was still there. You made a choice, Liv, he said, trying to sound calm. I don't hold a grudge, for Jake's sake, but there's no fixing it. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I know, she said, but I want him to be happy, and I want you in his life. I'm already in his life, Ethan answered firmly, and I will be. Liv smiled weakly. Thank you for your speech, she said. You've always been strong. Ethan nodded, relieved. He hadn't forgiven her, but his anger had eased. They returned to Jake, who was chatting with Marcus. Dad, can I go with Uncle Marcus some more? Jake asked, beaming. 5 minutes, Ethan said with a wink. Liv went to her desk, and Ethan looked at his son, feeling himself step forward. Robertson came over and clapped him on the shoulder. Hayes, you did it, he said. I'm proud of you. Thank you, Coach, Ethan replied with a smile. The evening ended late, and Ethan and Jake returned to the room. Jake had fallen asleep, and Ethan sat by the window, looking out at the lights of Los Angeles. He thought about Emily, about how she had told him to show he was up. She was right. Ethan Hayes drove his old Ford Mustang down the highway, heading back to Austin from Los Angeles. Jake, his 10-year-old son, was asleep in the back seat, hugging his backpack. The NFL senior night was behind him, the speech, the applause, the conversation with Liv, his ex-wife. Ethan felt relieved, but also tired. He'd proven to himself and Jake that he could get back up, but the wounds of divorce and the loss of his career still rankled. With L.A. behind him, he was looking forward for his son, for himself. They arrived in Austin late at night. Ethan woke Jake, helped him carry his backpack home, and put him to bed. The boy fell asleep as soon as he hit the pillow, and Ethan sat on the couch, looking at the photo on the refrigerator. Jake in his football uniform, smiling. He thought about Liv's words, her apology, her request that he take care of her son. He hadn't forgiven her, but his anger had subsided. The main thing now was to give Jake stability. In the morning, Ethan woke up to the smell of coffee. He went down to the kitchen where Jake was already fiddling with the toaster, trying to spread jam on bread. Dad, you've been asleep for ages, Jake said, grinning. I'm hungry already. Ethan laughed, patting his son on the head. 100 years, he said, taking the toast. You just don't know how to wait. Come on, spread it properly, not like an artist. Jake chuckled, spreading jam on his plate. Ethan poured himself coffee, feeling the warmth of this simple morning. After L.A., he realized that moments like these with his son at home were his new life. Dad, can we go to practice today? Jake asked, chewing on his toast. I want to watch you race the guys. Yes, Ethan replied, smiling, but only if you don't tell them how to throw the ball. I'm a better thrower than Alex, Jake said, grinning. Well, you tell him that, Ethan replied with a wink. That afternoon, they drove to the school field, where the team was preparing for the new season. The boys, fresh from winning the championship, were full of energy but still awkward. Ethan whistled, gathering them into a circle. Okay, guys, don't relax, he said, crossing his arms. The win was cool, but there's a new season ahead. We're working on defense today. Alex, don't throw it into the stands. Alex, the quarterback, rolled his eyes but nodded. Got it, coach, he said. But if Trevor stumbles again, it's not my fault. Trevor, a nimble runner, stuck his tongue out at him. Don't throw it crookedly yourself, he muttered. Ethan clapped his hands. Enough of this chatter, he said. 3 laps around the field, then passes. Run. The boys ran, and Jake sat in the stands, chewing gum. Ethan noticed his son watching him with pride, and it warmed him. Half an hour later, Emily Walker appeared on the field with her son Jason. Emily, in jeans and a t-shirt, carried a bag of notebooks, and Jason carried a toy ball. Coach, are your boys still alive? She called out, smirking. Or have you already run them in? As long as they're breathing, Ethan replied, smiling. Did you come to check? Yeah, Jason, she said, nodding at her son, who ran to Jake. He decided he wanted to be a football player like you. Well, we'll fix that, Ethan said, winking at Jason. Jake, show him how to throw. Jake and Jason started kicking the ball around, laughing, and Emily sat down on the stands next to Ethan. How's Los Angeles? She asked, her tone direct but warm. Not run away from the old stars? Ethan chuckled as he looked out at the field. It was. Weird, he said. A lot of memories, but Jake was thrilled, and I said a few words. Guess I didn't screw up. Emily smiled, her eyes sparkling. I told you you could handle it, she said. And Liv, have you seen her? Ethan nodded, his face becoming more serious. Yes, he said. She apologized. Said she was wrong. I haven't forgiven her, but for Jake's sake, I don't want war. Emily looked at him, her gaze soft. That's right, she said. You're doing everything you can for him, and that's cool. Ethan shrugged, but her words stung. Sometimes it feels like it's not enough, he admitted. He asks about Liv, and I don't know what to say. Tell the truth, Emily said, her tone direct. But don't burden him. He's a child. He needs both of you around, even if in different ways. Ethan nodded, feeling grateful. Emily always spoke plainly, and it helped him keep his head clear. You're too smart to be a teacher, he said, grinning. You're too soft to be a coach, she replied, rolling her eyes. Okay, I gotta go. Jason, don't throw the ball at my head. Jason chuckled and Jake ran up to his father. Dad, can I go with Jason some more? He asked, out of breath. 5 minutes, Ethan said, patting him on the head. Emily walked away, taking Jason with her, and Ethan watched Jake run across the field. These moments with his son, with his team, with Emily were what kept him going. He knew he wasn't fully healed yet, but he felt like he was moving forward. That night, he and Jake ordered pizza and sat down to watch a comedy. Jake laughed, spilling his soda, and Ethan watched him, feeling warm. After the movie, Jake fell asleep on the couch, and Ethan carried him to bed, adjusting the covers. He sat by the window, looking out at the dark sky, and thought about Los Angeles. The speech, the applause, Liv's apology, it hadn't been about forgiveness, it had been about closing a chapter. Now he was building a new one. The next morning, Ethan woke up early, made coffee, and walked out onto the porch. The sun was just rising, lighting up the field in front of the house. Jake was still asleep, but Ethan heard footsteps and turned around. Emily was standing on the porch, holding 2 mugs of coffee and a bag of donuts. You're early, he said, surprised. Where's Jason? At my grandma's, she replied, handing him a mug. I decided to stop by. How are you doing after Los Angeles? Ethan took the coffee with a shrug. It's okay, he said. It was weird seeing everyone. But Jake's happy, and that's the main thing. Emily nodded, sitting down on the step. A new day, huh? She said, looking at the dawn. Yeah, Ethan said, smiling. And a new life, maybe. She looked at him, her smile warm, but with a familiar hint of mockery. Don't get cocky, coach, she said, nudging him with her elbow. But yeah, it looks like it. Jake ran out onto the porch, holding a football. Dad, let's play, he shouted, throwing the ball to Ethan. Ethan caught it, laughing. Okay, buddy, he said, but only if you don't brag. Emily stood up, grinning. I'm a judge, she said, and don't let me get bored. They ran onto the field, Jake throwing the ball, Ethan catching it, Emily screaming when someone missed. Ethan watched them, feeling that there were more than just days ahead. Maybe not happiness in the full sense, but a start, and that was enough. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.